Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 91. If you visit this week's guest's website as a regular reader, I'll be honest with you, you might not be blown away at first glance. It looks familiar, maybe even a little simple. And to be completely candid, when I first learned of this platform, I didn't fully appreciate what I was looking at either. In our current media landscape, what we often talk about here as the outrage economy, we are conditioned to look for the flashing lights. We look for the massive engagement numbers, the heated comment sections, and the content designed to spike our adrenaline. This platform intentionally avoids all that. It's designed to look familiar, but that familiarity actually hides a massive, quiet revolution in how quality information can be surfaced. As I dug deeper into the architecture, I realized this is a potential game changer. As we've discussed with many experts on this show, social platforms and algorithmic feeds have a foundational flaw. They optimize for engagement. To keep you scrolling, they feed you high arousal, polarizing content from the loudest voices on the fringes. They treat us like reactive, purely emotional creatures. But what if a platform flipped the financial incentives entirely upside down? What if instead of rewarding clicks and niche audience capture, an algorithm rewarded bridge building? What if an author made the most money not by preaching to their angry choir, but by writing something so nuanced and factually grounded that it actually resonated with someone holding an opposing viewpoint? And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer. This platform is called Aemula, that's A-E-M-U-L-A, and it's still very early days. Because it's early, there's a genuine opportunity for us to help shape it, both as readers and as writers. If you're a reader, this is your chance to finally escape the exhausting, ad-driven outrage machine. Instead of being fed rage bait by an algorithm that just wants to track your data and keep you scrolling, you get a clean, quiet space focused on deep, impactful, long-form content. Your subscription fee doesn't go toward corporate ad networks. It directly funds independent journalists who are actually doing the hard work of reporting, allowing them to write without pandering to a toxic echo chamber. By participating here, you aren't just passively consuming content. Your behavior actually trains and informs the entire system. But this isn't about running up a score for your favorite author or downvoting people you disagree with. That kind of echo chamber behavior actually gets downweighted by the platform. Instead, the system looks for high-quality readers. If you are someone who steps outside your usual bubble, interacts with a variety of authors, and actively seeks out new perspectives, the algorithm gives your input real weight. When a credible reader with a track record of identifying high-quality content supports a piece, that author earns more, even if they have a fraction of the views of a viral fringe article. As a reader, not only are you getting a diet of more thoughtful and more accurate content, but you have a literal hand in helping the wider community get a more accurate, less polarizing understanding of the world just by being thoughtful about what you read. If you are a writer or creator, if you believe your ideas have the power to cross ideological divides and bust through information silos, this is the ultimate proving ground. Put your content to the test. If your work successfully bridges communities, you earn. If it just feeds a polarized echo chamber, it won't. Even if other articles get many more views or reactions, your articles can earn more if they appeal across diverse audiences. It's an entirely open source, community-governed attempt to bring professional journalism into the internet age without the toxic side effects. To help us break down how this abstract math actually works in practice, I'm joined today by the co-founder of Aemula.
My name is Don Templeman. I was the founder of Aemula, and I originally had the idea back in 2016. I was studying computer science at Wake Forest. I was managing our university newsroom and thought that there were new ways to apply technology to the problem of rebuilding trust and reversing polarization in media.
Don Templeman spent 7 years working in finance, which gave him a front row seat to a fundamental truth about human nature. People will always exploit incentives to their absolute limit. Instead of fighting that reality, Don and his team built a system where gaming the system actually results in a healthier society. We'll dive into how we can move past the 19th century business models of news, lower the collective temperature, and change the rules of the game right after this short break to hear from one of our fellow shows in the Democracy Group network.
For almost 2 months, a group of anarchists camped out in a tiny park in New York City and turned it into an anti-capitalist village. You might know it as Occupy Wall Street, but that was 15 years ago. And today, we return to that park to ask, what happens when ordinary people harness collective power and try to change the world? From Future Hindsight, this is Occupy, an unfinished uprising. Coming July 9th, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You're listening to Outrage Overload, and we are talking with Aemula co-founder Don Templeman about reshaping the structural incentives of the information landscape. Here is my conversation with Don Templeman. Don Templeman, thank you so much for making time for our show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting technology and a different, just algorithmic approach to the whole thing that I think it's hard to get that message to people off, as the initial thing. It's like, it's just another, website, right? It's just like everybody else. But I think it's not obvious unless you dig in a little bit that it really does have some fundamental things different. But I wanted to start just a little bit about the sort of user experience of Aemula a little bit. And specifically, what the user what happens when the user gets there, but also, how maybe that has some specific design elements to maybe make it sort of move a reader from kind of the reactive system 1 emotional state to more analytical system 2.
Yeah. And part of what we want to do is make it feel familiar. So that's why I think when a lot of people come on to read, they might say like, oh, what is the actual fundamental difference to what we're doing here? But part of that user experience is trying to create more of an intentional focus, actually spending time with long form content. While we're also working on removing any outside influence that typically creeps into that information environment, which is what we find on social media, which is why there's no ads. We're trying to avoid more dark patterns that you start to see that are trying to capture your attention and draw engagement. Really, we understand that you only have time to read a few articles per day. And as a news curator, we're really trying to focus on like, what are the most impactful articles for you to read, presenting them in a way that just allows you to come on and understand what you need to focus on, but then framing those interactions in a way that primes you to go into it with a more thoughtful experience in mind, which comes with like how we have users interact with articles, but also fundamentally just down to how we're recommending content to users based on those interactions. Our curation algorithms are already pretty well tuned on being able to show you stuff that you will be able to enjoy and engage with. Like, we know what people want to read. The problem is on social media, they're optimizing for time spent on platform, how long you're scrolling. So they want to filter it in with a bunch of other stuff that's not necessarily worth your time. But if you take those incentives away and we say, you're a paid subscriber, you've already paid for the value you're going to get from this. We don't need to take up any more of your time than you find valuable. You can come in and we can show you like, here are the actual highest impact things. So you can spend time with it, understand the full nuance of it, and kind of like put blinders on, because you don't need the full access to everything, because it's just impossible to actually understand the full complexity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those that kind of flipping the incentives upside down a little bit. And so people understand a little bit about what we're talking about, because we might have gone, maybe we jumped ahead of ourselves, got in front of our skis a little bit. But so let's talk about how these this change to the incentives, what the product of that is. Like, how does that affect? What's the goal of it? As I understand it, part of it is to have, sort of lower intensity, less emotional content. So just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. On social media, a lot of what you end up with is the people on the fringes that are most willing to speak the loudest about some fringe idea. And like, they're doing that because there's some passionate thinking they need to be spreading this kind of belief system that might not be widely observed. And then you have people that are professionals putting in time, putting in a lot of investigative work that need to actually be compensated for their time. Like, it is a full-time job. Reporting the news is a difficult, time-intensive process, and it needs to be compensated accordingly if you want that level of quality in the work you're doing. So you have to look into the actual financial incentives that get people to do this type of work. And currently, with people publishing on social media, they're compensated based on how many people they can get to click on their posts, how many people they can get to subscribe. So you start to fall into these incentive structures of audience capture. Like, you find your niche audience and you want to reinforce their beliefs as much as possible. And if you conflict with their beliefs, then they'll leave you and go find someone else, because there are so many alternatives out there for any belief system. And you're trying to get those initial clicks. So you want to be talking about the most inflammatory things. Everyone needs to be commentating on what is like the piece of discourse that everyone is arguing about right now. Like, that's how you get attention in that attention economy. And traditional newsrooms also fall into that audience capture. They're only competing for niche market space, trying to get that attention of their existing subscriber base. If you want to start to incentivize people to write content that doesn't actually fall into those traps, you need to change the actual financial incentives. So the way that we do it is, you're not paid based on the number of views you get. You're not paid based on engagement. You're not trying to capture your own subscribers. Our subscribers pay into the protocol. They're already subscribed. So anything they do on the platform is already past a monetary decision. So you don't need to convert a paid subscriber. You don't have to pander to an existing audience. There are already paid subscribers out there. Everyone's paid. And since we're not incentivizing clicks, what we are weighting the payments to the authors based on is how diverse of support they can get from communities around them, how much they can move someone's point of view. Like, if you can convince someone that typically disagrees with you to move slightly towards your point of view, that is an impactful article. Like, you've helped to shift someone's worldview. That should be compensated. If you're getting diverse support, you're likely making strong factual arguments that are widely agreed upon. And if you're getting support from users that have a track record of reading high quality content, interacting with high quality readers, we understand that that's a higher level signal. So we can build all of these signals in to actually compensating writers for writing that type of high quality work. Because with any incentive structure, people are going to optimize to try to maximize their earnings through it. So as long as you make those incentives point towards a goal that we actually desire, which is high quality content that bridges communities, then that's the outcome you'll get, essentially.
Right. Yeah. So that's this idea that even if somebody games the system, it actually is a good thing. Let's just kind of elaborate on that just a little bit.
Yeah. So I professionally worked in finance for 7 years. And so obviously through that, I realized whatever incentives that are in place are going to be exploited to their full extent. People are going to optimize for making the most money possible in a system. So we don't want to push back on that human nature. Like, we accept that as fact. That's going to happen. We can just make our incentive structures in a way that as people start to gamify them, we end up with actually a healthier information environment that does produce that high quality level of reporting that we're actually trying to promote.
Can you just, I know you already touched on it, but maybe can you elaborate just a little more of how that actually works? Well, I guess I want to start in a couple of places. One is, okay. How is the writer or reader actually awarded for that high integrity behavior?
Yeah. So I think it helps to start with writers. Our payout algorithm is based on diversity of support, the credibility of the users interacting with your content, and how close you are to center. So we map everyone out relative based on interactions they made in the past. So we know roughly who agrees with whom. We can see these communities form. We don't know what those ideologies are. We don't know what the communities are, but we roughly know who typically agrees with whom. And we can start to show articles to people that are close to their existing beliefs, because you want people to be able to engage with content. Like people are looking for stuff that's interesting. That's going back to like, how do you compete with social media attention spans? You can show people like you can show people stuff that is near their current belief systems. You can show them stuff that's slightly challenging to those belief systems. You can still trigger all of those like human responses to make engaging content, but you can do it in a way that's not actually detrimental to reversing polarization. It's kind of the scale of that. If you show people stuff too far outside of their community, they'll reject it, and that leads to more inflammatory rhetoric. But we can look at these communities, show them stuff that is just on the outside of where their current belief system is, so they start to discover those new points of view. And people that are more towards the fringes of this relative mapping we're making of ideologies, those are helpful on-ramps for people to start coming in and engaging with content if that is where their beliefs lie. We use it more of a bridge towards the middle so we can start to create more of a cohesive consensus narrative. So the way that we're compensating writers is when they write an article, we can look at how it's how it's playing in that system. So if it's serving as a good bridge between communities, if it's helping to move people more towards center or pulling them out of tight-knit communities, we can start to reward that for being high quality work. And I think like when we're talking about mapping out ideological communities, we're not just thinking like left versus right. Like there's many different dimensions that we're looking at how people typically agree with each other. So it can be on a wide variety of topics and like not just political partisan divides. But as people start to interact on the platform, you can start to see how good those articles are at achieving our mission. And we weight payouts from our subscription pool to those writers based on how good of a job they're doing in that sense versus just weight and engagement. So you can have a writer that publishes an article, it gets good support from a few communities near them, from credible users with a long track record. That will earn relatively more than someone who's getting 10 times more views, but from some fringe community that only reads and supports that author, because that's not necessarily helping people in the wider community get a more accurate understanding of the world, whereas that other author is writing content like that.
Now, is any of that exposed back to writers and readers in terms of kind of knowing where they sit, like, and some of these attributes that have been assigned to them?
Yeah. And so I'm a visual person, so we do have a visual model, which is essentially a 3D map. It shows where you are, where articles are, where other authors are. So you can see where you are. And we're working on ways to kind of like track how you move throughout time. So you can start to see like how communities are forming and shifting. But it helps to show you roughly where you align and who we think you'd agree with, who we think might oppose your points of view. And you're free to go and like freely explore this to try to discover new perspectives or use that as a way to uncover new articles to essentially like take control of the algorithm. So you're not having to rely on our recommendations. Like you can go and choose your own adventure through this. But the thing is, we're not labeling that for any specific ideologies. So you can't go on there and see like, oh, am I center right, center left? Am I far right, far left? We want to avoid a categorization problem, because once you try to put labels on something, you start to lose information because you're sort of overfitting people into categories. And as a neutral platform, we don't necessarily want to know what these ideologies are, because kind of like going back to what you were talking about with people forming conspiracies, we don't want people to ever look at us and be like, oh, they're trying to push a specific narrative. Oh, they're only promoting specific voices. The only way to really protect against that is to say, like, we actually don't know what any of this is. Like, we couldn't push a narrative if we wanted to. So we only look at users with fully anonymized information, so no personal data, and articles only pretty much like its storage address, nothing about its content. And we see how they've interacted on the platform in the past. So we can create this relativistic map that is showing ideological communities without any additional labeling on what that necessarily means. But it is a helpful way for users to go on and see like roughly where they fall relative to everyone else in the platform.
Well, and it's hard. It's interesting too because like I read some of the underlying algorithms and things like that, or about the algorithms and things like that, and yeah, it doesn't use the labels, but it's interesting when you talk about it. You kind of have to use some of those labels. Like I've heard you say things like it'll push people to the center or whatever, right? The center of what?
Yeah.
Like it's not necessarily a left-right spectrum center either. It's something about a center between these groups, which we don't even know what the groups are.
That is a thing it is difficult to talk about because it is living in this like weird abstract space. So speaking about it in this context, it's like you do try to map that onto putting labels onto it. So it's something that's more helpful to sort of like experience and play around with and really like see how it grows over time. We're still early enough to where we're not getting that much information from our small community. And also the people that are on the platform are typically the ones that understand these problems exist. So they're already pretty centric. But it is interesting to see how we're already starting to form these communities and go in and read articles in those communities and try to get an understanding of like, what are these people believing and how does it compare to the articles in the space around me in this map?
Yeah, and I heard you mention that there's in terms of the weighting and who and how you do the payouts. You kind of mentioned, I don't know if I had the language quite right, but about like a high quality reader. Like, what does that mean? And do I get to know if I'm a high quality reader or not?
We're trying to come up with a way to show people sort of like a score, like a reputation system. The problem is, since it is kind of an abstract score, like the number doesn't really have much meaning for you. But we're trying to come up with a way to show that to the reader. But the thing is, high quality reader is one that's interacting with a number of different authors. They're spending time trying to actively discover new perspectives. They have a track record on the platform of supporting articles that ended up being high quality, credible articles, disagreeing with articles that ended up being low quality articles. So we know that their votes and interactions with articles are typically correlated with how that article ends up being ranked. But a low quality user is someone who typically only reads a single author. They're strongly supporting that author. And then they're going out and disagreeing with people that hold existing or opposing beliefs. So they're kind of acting in that polarizing, like community-based identity system where it's like, I want to support my community. I want to disagree with everyone else. We don't necessarily ignore what they're doing, but we can decrease the weight of what they're saying because we understand the signals that they're sending to the system. It's like, we already know you agree with this one writer. We don't have to keep counting the support votes. Like you can't just like run up the score for someone that you want to support, and you can't kind of like demote or try to deplatform people that you disagree with because we can see that's kind of typical of the behavior you're using on the platform. So that's kind of the difference.
Well, and that's potentially another example of if you did try to game that again might be sort of okay. Unless maybe, unless you start running a side hustle saying, hey, I'll like your post if you pay me $10. Now I have such a high reputation. My worth is more to the network or whatever. So, but it seems like even gaming that is potentially still good for the overall ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. And we want to create those systems where it's, as you gamify them, it helps improve everything. That's actually core to the name Aemula, is it comes from a line in Lucan's Civil War, which is rivalry and virtue spurs them on, which is talking about how people sort of competing individually to better themselves end up increasing the overall level of the community as a whole. So it's like we want people to try to independently go in there and gamify the system because it does create a healthier environment. But we also know that like we're not going to be perfect from the start. So there could be flaws with some of these algorithms that we're putting out there, which is why everything's open source and community governed. So people can vote on changes to the platform if it's not necessarily achieving the goals that we're trying to achieve, so that over time we can kind of iterate on it and improve it so that we can actually keep that system of gamification improving the overall health of the network as a whole.
Yeah. So if I'm a subscriber, you know, in order to be aligned, I would want to be aligned with the goals of the overall system, right? So I would only want to pay if this is a thing that's going to give me something that I also align with. So A, what is that? And then B, like what would be a good way for a subscriber to weigh, 6 months or a year later? How would it be a way to sort of measure whether I got the value out of it? Is it because I'm calmer? Is it because I'm not getting in fights with my uncle anymore? What do you think?
Yeah, that's like our goal is to rebuild trust and reverse polarization. So hopefully people start to feel that as they interact with the platform. But the problem is the people that are most in need of depolarization efforts are not those that are seeking them out. And really, like, what we're trying to build is something that is societally relevant. It's internet scale. It's able to engage with everyone. And part of that relies on being able to engage with people that are on more of the fringes, that are engaging in inflammatory rhetoric. So we need to have that type of content on the platform. We need to have people able to come in and read and engage with it. It needs to have some level of success on the platform relative to everything else, just to serve as an on-ramp for people to come on and start reading. So you could come on and read, and in 6 months to a year, not necessarily feel any effects of having been drawn to like a more moderate center or having anything about your political beliefs having changed. What we would hope you find is you trust the information you're reading more because it is open source, it's fully transparent, it's in a verifiably neutral environment, there's credibility tied to each individual writer. So it is people that might not trust mainstream media or people that don't like reading on social media and think that it's unverified. Like, you can come read on Aemula and understand that it's just higher quality information in general. We're trying to solve for a longer term future of knowing that we've been increasing polarization in the US since the 70s. It's going to take us just as long to try to reverse those trends. So we're not trying to bring someone on and immediately expose them to opposing points of view, trying to get them to change their mind. Like, we're not trying to like manipulate your belief system, if that makes sense. And that goes back to research on showing people stuff that's drastically opposed to their beliefs will polarize them further and actually go against what you're trying to solve for. We think that if you believe your ideas are best and you're trying to convince other people of your ideas, Aemula is the best place to do that because that's what we're actively trying to achieve. We're trying to expose your ideas to new people. It's a competing marketplace of independent writers that all own their own content or all trying to earn their own income from it. And we just think that inherently the best ideas will win out in that type of environment. So if you do have some radical belief, but you think people need to hear it, and you want to convince people to that, you're better off writing on Aemula than writing on social media, because if you write on social media, your followers are going to be people that already agree with it. And the only people that are going to be engaging with it are from completely opposing points of view that are trying to argue with it. And similarly with traditional media or writing a Substack, your subscribers are going to be people that want to agree with you. So if you want to actually have an impact of your message, we're trying to help you do that. And whatever that abstract center is or whatever abstract moderation is, it really is just what the community as a whole has agreed upon as like, this is probably the best explanation of what is going on around us.
Yeah, it makes me think. Yeah, I love that. It makes me think a little bit about, we do like the social proof side of things, right? I mean, we do have that sort of need for that. I mean, in some sense with Aemula, if you're a writer, your social proof is you're making reasonable money. That's almost like the social proof there. But will that have the same kind of emotional feel to it that I'm getting there? Because, and as a reader, we like social proof too. Like, oh yeah, lots of people. I'm on the right track because lots of people agree with me. Yeah. And does Aemula deliver that in some way?
So right now we're trying to build out tools to actually help explain to people their impact on the platform. And it goes back to that problem of like, these are sort of abstract numbers. So how do we tie meaning to them without skewing the actual meaning of what it is representing. But for writers, what we're trying to solve for is there is almost this, uh, like if you look at Substack, if you look at your page views, they seem more highly inflated than what I actually feel like the impact of my work is doing. Like I run a Substack as well, and I see all of these views, but I'm like the actual engagement with it, like feedback I'm hearing from readers, doesn't seem like that's all happening. And like when you go through and look at it, it's like people are getting their views double counted. My own views were counting for it. There's followers who see it in the feed that don't necessarily engage with it. I think I saw someone post today. She was like, I have 15,000 followers, but like it doesn't seem that way. So there's almost this inflation of engagement that you see on social platforms. It's like if you post a post on X, it shows you the view count, but it's anyone who scrolls by it in their feed gets counted. So they're trying to be like, oh, look at the social proof. All these people are interacting with your content, but people aren't dumb. Like they understand that, like they don't feel that's actually the impact of it. So what we're trying to represent is more, here's the actual impact of your work. So we're showing like, this is how far you have moved other people's beliefs, like how people have accepted and incorporated your messaging into their worldview. Not necessarily a pure engagement number. We're not trying to be like, oh, 100 people read your piece. We're trying to say like you've actually shifted community boundaries. You've helped bridge divides between like arguments that were occurring between two adjacent communities. We want to show that actual impact of work, and trying to weigh if it's better to show it as like a number in some way or show it in that visualization of the graph as like, here's how you've actually contributed to how people change their views over time. Because I think a lot of people when they write, like they're trying to get their message across to actually like make a difference in other people's beliefs. Like I know that I don't need to sit there and reinforce people that already agree with me, because it's like, what are we doing here? We're trying to convince the people that aren't going to read this on their own if they see this in the feed.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I wanted to kind of just zoom out for kind of some final thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, where do you see this looking in, what do you see this looking like in 5 years? Like if you could imagine what your life is like and what would it feel like to if Aemula really achieved what you want it to achieve?
Yeah. I think to really achieve the mission we're setting out to do on actually reversing polarization is you have to build to some level of societal relevance, which it becomes part of like the actual discourse. I think if you look at what Substack has achieved to date, like they have 5 million paid subscribers. I think they just released that they have 100,000 publications on the platform now. It's at a point where if I bring up Substack to someone, almost everyone's like, oh yeah, like I've heard of Substack. I read a few Substacks. I think that is like the scale of societal relevance. Currently, we have a Substack integration. Like most people are primarily writing on Substack. We know that we're early stage. We don't necessarily have the economic incentives to get people to start writing natively on the platform. But the idea is to grow to a point of that societal relevance where we do have the economic incentives to start getting people to natively publish. And really, it's like we want this to be a third option for journalists or creatives, where it's, you think you either need to go to some institutional route where you work at a traditional publication or you work at an agency and you have the stability and support resources and distribution there, but you don't have much control. Or you have people that are going independent and writing on Substack or Patreon or Beehive, where you have full control, but you don't have access to any of those resources. You're having to build your own subscriber base. We want to be this third option where it's, you come on, you can access community support resources. We have professional newsroom resources. There is that existing distribution. You don't have to convert your own paid subscribers, but you have full ownership and control over what you're doing. You earn directly from the subscribers. There's no censorship pressures. We want that to be an actual economically viable option for people who are creating content. And then for readers, we want them to actually be able to go on and find enough high quality, credible, trustworthy content where they can start to build it into their daily news reading and like part of their information seeking endeavor, so that we can start to actually achieve those goals of kind of allowing our incentives to create that healthier information environment.
Yeah, and if that, even taking it further than that, so let's say you get there and it goes even further. I mean, do you, in terms of like legacy media, do you see this as sort of replacing legacy media, or somehow making legacy media's survival more likely?
Yeah. When, like, I think at the beginning I said we were focused on independent journalism. And when I say that, it's not necessarily like the subset of journalism that's done independently. It's more, I think all journalism should be done independently. And I think what we've seen with the traditional model is their business model has become one of trying to achieve economies of scale. And they've consolidated smaller newsrooms. There's been a lot of like private equity roll-ups of small newsrooms. The major newsrooms have been laying off staff to try to reduce the cost of actually news reporting because they're competing with free to use social media. Like that's just the attention economy now. So they're trying to do this economies of scale playbook, which is just reducing the number of voices that are actually contributing to like the professional journalistic process. If you take that to the extreme, you eventually hit pressures where you can't concentrate further because you lose all the nuance. People don't trust the centralization of the news and the media. Like I would say after the round of layoffs at the Washington Post, like there's 4 papers of record in the United States for 350 million people. And like even those are starting to get like have their trustworthiness and credibility questioned. It's clear that like you can't continue to try to scale that business model into the new information digital age. And obviously like putting AI on top of that and how people are discovering news now changes a lot of the calculus there. But what we're able to do is scale infinitely, where we can create those same newsroom resources where you can collaborate, you can get peer editorial, you can have contributors of research and analysis, you can have data feeds, like all these things. You can get credentialing to go to events. We can do a lot of the same services that a professional newsroom has, but offer it in this like community setting where it's available to everyone. You can come in independently and access these resources and have that stability, but then continue to write independently so you never run into those centralization issues. So there's not a reason why every newsroom wouldn't be able to shift towards this independent model and eventually get to a point where all information is coordinated completely independently, because it allows you to get a more nuanced perspective. It's better for the readers. It's better for the actual business of the newsrooms. You just have to get to a point where you have that credibility to be able to actually build out those resources and have a trusting audience and get the community to be able to balance each other out and self-govern and grow. Like it is a very optimistic vision on what it can be, but there's not any reason why you couldn't achieve that in the future.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I hope that all comes true. Because I mean, obviously, as you know, like you can't keep doing it the way we're doing it, which is not good, right? I don't want to lose the journalism and the journalism professionals that we have. Yeah.
It's the business models that we created for traditional news was designed in the 1800s. It's like we were distributing news on boats and horses. You can't expect that to work at internet scale. Like these problems existed at the time, but they were on the margins. But it's once you scale it up to billions of people, it starts to break and crack around the edges. But then also our first attempt at social media was never designed to be a long form information discovery news resource. So you need to go back and actually like question the design of some of these things to see how we can actually like bring the professional journalistic process into the age of the internet.
That's awesome. Yeah, very true. Well, Don Templeman, thank you so much for making time for us. Really enjoyed speaking with you.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed it as well.
That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. Outrage Overload is a Connors Institute podcast. The Connors Institute for Nonpartisan Research and Civic Engagement at Shippensburg University works to disseminate high-quality, nonpartisan information to the American public around issues of societal well-being, democracy promotion, and news literacy. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.